Right now, beneath the feet of 22 million people, the ground is vanishing. Not slowly, not gradually. It is collapsing. Mexico City, one of the largest urban concentrations on the planet, is sinking into the ancient lake bed it was built upon, and the rate has just crossed a threshold that is sending emergency signals through every geological monitoring station in North America. This is not a warning from the future. This is not a drill. The collapse is active. The sensors are screaming. And right now, at this very moment, cracks are splitting open streets. Pipes are rupturing underground, and buildings that stood for decades are tilting at angles that should be impossible. Scientists are terrified. What's happening beneath Mexico City is no longer a slow disaster. It is accelerating, and nobody knows where the bottom is. The first sign comes not from a laboratory. It comes from a bus driver named Rodrigo, navigating his usual morning route through the Iztapalapa district when his vehicle lurches violently to one side. He slams the brakes. Through the windshield, the road ahead has fractured, a jagged split running diagonally across 4 lanes of asphalt, the edges curling upward like torn paper. Passengers press against the windows. Some are already screaming. Rodrigo radios dispatch, but the line is overwhelmed. Across the city, within the same 15-minute window, similar calls are flooding emergency centers. A metro station in Xochimilco is reporting structural cracking along the platform walls. A hospital in Tláhuac is evacuating its ground floor as the floor itself begins to slope visibly toward the southeast. 3 water mains have burst simultaneously in Nezahualcóyotl. The city is not experiencing one event. It is experiencing a systemic collapse event unfolding across dozens of neighborhoods at once. Ground-penetrating radar teams deployed by UNAM, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, are already in the field within the hour. What their instruments reveal stops the lead geologist mid-sentence during her field report. The subsidence rate in the eastern districts has jumped, not by a small margin. The clay layers beneath the city, ancient lake bed sediment stretching down hundreds of meters, are compressing faster than any model predicted. In some zones, the ground has dropped nearly half a meter in the past 72 hours alone. Half a meter. In 3 days? The previous annual average for those same zones was 30 centimeters per year. Something fundamental has changed below. Something has given way. The Mexican government's National Center for Disaster Prevention, CINAPRED, issues its first public statement at 7:43 in the morning. It is careful, measured. It speaks of accelerated subsidence events and ongoing monitoring. But the scientists standing behind the director are not measured. Their faces are pale. Their body language tells a different story than the words being spoken at the podium. Off camera, geological engineers are on phone calls with counterparts in the United States Geological Survey and with teams at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. The conversations are urgent. The data being shared is causing alarm far beyond Mexico's borders. By mid-morning, the mayor of Mexico City has declared a state of geological emergency, a designation that has never been used before in the city's modern history. Seismic monitoring networks are being redirected. Satellite imaging from 3 different international agencies is being tasked to focus exclusively on the Valley of Mexico basin. The Federal Electricity Commission is pre-positioning generators at hospitals and water treatment facilities. The word being used in internal government communications, leaked within hours to Mexican journalists, is not subsidence. The word being used is destabilization. Emergency engineers from the Army Corps are dispatched to assess 47 critical infrastructure points across the metropolitan area: bridges, underpasses, elevated metro lines, pipeline junctions. What they find at site after site is a consistent, terrifying pattern. Foundations that were poured to a certain depth are now operating at different angles than they were engineered to handle. Steel support columns in underground metro tunnels show fresh stress fractures, the kind that develop not over years, but over days or hours. One senior engineer radios back from a critical junction beneath the Periferico Ring Road and says quietly that the junction should be closed immediately. The order comes down within minutes. Traffic on one of the city's most critical arteries grinds to a complete standstill. The warning signs were always there. Geologists have been sounding alarms about Mexico City's subsidence for decades. The city was built on what was once Lake Texcoco, a vast, shallow body of water drained by Spanish colonizers in the 17th century to make room for urban expansion. What was left beneath the city was not solid ground. It was clay. Saturated, compressible, ancient clay sediment in some places more than 300 meters deep. When the city began extracting groundwater from the aquifer beneath that clay to supply its growing population, the clay began to compress. The water holding it up was being removed. The ground began to sink. Over the past century, parts of Mexico City have sunk by as much as 10 meters. 10 meters. That is a 3-story building's worth of earth, simply gone, compressed downward by the weight of 22 million people and the withdrawal of the water that once supported it. The rate was always considered manageable, alarming, but slow enough that engineers could adapt, buildings could be reinforced, infrastructure could be adjusted over time. That assumption is now destroyed. What is happening in the past 72 hours represents a phase shift. The system has crossed a threshold. The clay is not just compressing anymore, it is fracturing. And fractured clay behaves in an entirely different, entirely more dangerous way than compressed clay. It does not compress uniformly. It collapses unevenly. It creates voids. It triggers surface failure without warning. Satellite data shows that the worst affected zones form a rough arc through the eastern and southeastern districts. Iztapalapa, Tláhuac, Texcoco, and into parts of Nezahualcóyotl. These are also, not coincidentally, the most densely populated zones of the city. They are home to millions of working-class families living in buildings that were never designed to handle differential settlement, the technical term for what happens when the ground beneath a structure sinks at different rates in different places, twisting foundations, cracking walls, and eventually causing catastrophic structural failure. The escalation comes faster than anyone is prepared for. By early afternoon, the cracking in Texcoco is no longer limited to streets and sidewalks. 2 residential apartment blocks, 6 stories each, housing approximately 400 families, are being evacuated after structural engineers confirm dangerous wall separation at foundation level. The buildings are not falling. Not yet. But the gap between the foundation edge and the surrounding earth, a gap that should be 0, is now measurable in centimeters and widening. Residents carry what they can in whatever bags they find. Children clutch toys. Elderly residents are helped down staircases by neighbors. The street outside fills with people who have nowhere definitive to go, staring back at the buildings they lived in hours ago. Emergency shelters are being opened at schools and sports facilities across the affected districts, but their capacity is nowhere near sufficient for the numbers already displaced, let alone the numbers that engineers estimate may need to leave their homes by nightfall. The Red Cross Mexico is mobilizing. The Army is deploying field kitchens. But the scale of what may be coming is not yet fully mapped, and the resources being committed are calibrated to what has already happened, not to what the data suggests is still coming, because the data is suggesting something far worse. The compaction event is not stabilizing. Sensor arrays embedded at various depths across the affected zone are transmitting in real time, and the readings are not leveling off. They are still climbing. The rate of subsidence is still accelerating. One geophysicist at UNM, speaking on background because she is not authorized to speak publicly, says a word that no one at the podium will say. She says the eastern lakebed zone may be approaching a point of rapid, nonlinear collapse. She says the models they have been using for 30 years were built on the assumption that the system would degrade gradually. She says those models may no longer apply. In the Iztapalapa district, a family of 5 is barricaded in their second-floor apartment. The staircase below them has partially collapsed. Not dramatically, not in a single crash, but in a slow, grinding tilt that has left the steps at an angle too steep and unstable to descend safely. The father calls emergency services. He is placed on hold. He calls again. He reaches a recording asking him to leave a message. He goes to his window and shouts into the street below, but the street is chaos. Neighbors running, a water main erupting in a geyser 3 houses down, the sound of a distant alarm system wailing from somewhere unseen. His youngest child is 7 years old and asking him why the floor feels funny. He does not have an answer. Across the city, stories like this are multiplying faster than emergency services can respond to them. A construction worker trapped in a partially collapsed excavation site in Tláhuac. A dialysis center in the south forced to shut down because the water supply line feeding it has ruptured. A school where 300 children are sheltering in place because the surrounding streets have become impassable, cracked, heaved, and in one section entirely swallowed by a sinkhole that opened without any warning at approximately 11:15 in the morning, swallowing a parked vehicle in a section of sidewalk in a matter of seconds. Witnesses describe the ground simply opening. No tremor, no rumble, just a sudden, silent absence of earth where earth had been moments before. The infrastructure failure is not incremental. It is systemic. The water distribution network beneath the affected zone was already fragile, a legacy system, decades old, running through ground that has been shifting for years. Now, as the ground fractures and heaves at accelerated rates, pipe joints that were already stressed are snapping. Water pressure in large sections of Iztapalapa, Tláhuac, and eastern Nezahualcóyotl drops to zero. Residents who turn on taps get nothing. Emergency water tanker trucks are deployed, but the roads to reach the worst affected neighborhoods are themselves compromised. Cracked surfaces, tilted underpasses, and at least one collapsed road bridge over a canal that cuts off a primary supply route entirely. The metro system, Line 12, which runs through some of the most heavily affected zones, and which suffered a devastating partial collapse in 2021, is suspended across its entire length. Line A, connecting the eastern suburbs to the city center, is suspended after engineers refuse to certify 2 viaduct sections as safe for operation. Hundreds of thousands of commuters are stranded. Surface roads are gridlocked. Emergency vehicles cannot move at the speed the crisis demands. The city's ability to respond to itself is being choked off by the very damage it is trying to address. Power begins to fluctuate in the early afternoon. The Federal Electricity Commission reports that 3 major underground transmission cables in the eastern zone have been severed by ground movement. The conduits surrounding them cracked and shifted until the cables inside sheared apart. Rolling blackouts began affecting neighborhoods as the grid compensates. Hospitals switch to generator power. Traffic signals go dark at hundreds of intersections simultaneously, adding to the surface gridlock. The communication network holds, for now, but cell towers in 2 zones report foundation warnings and are flagged for possible emergency shutdown if structural integrity cannot be confirmed. What makes this disaster reach beyond Mexico, city's borders, beyond a local emergency into a continental concern, is the question of what lies beneath and what else might be connected to it. The Valley of Mexico sits within a complex tectonic environment. The lakebed subsidence is driven primarily by groundwater extraction and clay compaction, not by tectonic movement. But subsidence at this scale and speed creates its own risks that interact with the tectonic environment in ways that remain poorly understood. The 1985 Mexico City earthquake, which killed at least 10,000 people, demonstrated with devastating clarity how the ancient lakebed amplifies seismic waves. Ground that elsewhere might produce moderate shaking becomes, in the lake zone, a resonant trap, amplifying seismic energy by a factor of 50 or more. As the clay fractures and voids develop beneath the city, the resonance characteristics of the ground are changing. Seismologists are running emergency models to understand what a moderate seismic event, even a magnitude 6.0, not exceptional for this region, would do to a lakebed that is currently fractured, voided, and destabilized in ways it has never been before. The preliminary outputs of those models are not being released publicly. Sources close to the modeling team describe the results as, quote, deeply concerning, and there is more. The Popocatépetl volcano, 70 kilometers southeast of the city center, is in a state of elevated activity. It has been for months. The relationship between volcanic loading, subsurface fluid movement, and sediment compaction in the basin is not fully mapped. No one is claiming direct causation, but the timing, an active volcano, a destabilizing lake bed, a city of 22 million people balanced on compressed clay above an emptying aquifer, is the kind of convergence that makes geologists go very quiet. As night falls over Mexico City, the scope of what has unfolded is beginning to resolve into numbers. Preliminary counts suggest more than 14,000 people have been displaced from their homes in the eastern districts. At least 60 buildings across the affected zone have been red tagged, condemned, and emptied, with engineers warning that the number will likely triple by morning as structural assessments continue in the dark, by flashlight in neighborhoods where the power is out. At least 11 people have been confirmed injured in collapse-related incidents. The number of people still unreachable in buildings that cannot be accessed due to road damage, or in households that have not yet been assessed, runs into the hundreds of thousands. Senapred has extended its geological emergency declaration through the next 72 hours, acknowledging, in the same breath, that 72 hours is an arbitrary window and that the underlying process does not recognize administrative timelines. The sensors are still reading. The subsidence is still active. The rate has not slowed. International offers of assistance are arriving. The United States has offered USGS technical support and urban search and rescue teams. Japan, with deep experience in ground subsidence from its own urban centers, has offered engineering consultation. The offers are being accepted. But here is what the offers cannot fix. The aquifer beneath Mexico City is not going to refill. The water that was extracted over a century of urban growth is not coming back on any human timescale. The clay that compressed when that water left will not re-expand. The ground that is sunk is not going to rise, and the fracturing that is happening now, in real time, beneath 22 million people, the fracturing that has crossed some threshold that the models did not predict and cannot yet fully explain, that process is ongoing. The lead geophysicist at UNAM holds a late-night press briefing. She is asked directly, "Has the situation stabilized?" She pauses. She looks at the reporters. She says the data does not show stabilization. She says her team is working through the night. She says they are looking at the sensor readings every 15 minutes. She says they will update the public as soon as they have information that is reliable enough to share. She is then asked, "What is the worst-case scenario?" She pauses again, longer this time. She says we are still defining what worst case means for an event of this type, at this scale, in a city of this size. She says the honest answer is that they do not yet know. She says, that is why we are afraid. Somewhere beneath the streets, in the ancient darkness of fractured clay and collapsing voids, 22 million lives rest on ground that is still moving, still sinking, still looking for the bottom. And the bottom has not yet been found.